Well, as I record these words, we're in the immediate wake of the feasts of St. Patrick and St. Joseph, so March 17th and March 19th. And I've always loved the coming together of those two feast days. Of course, St. Joseph, very important to the Italian people. Patrick to my own people, the Irish. I've always loved the fact that the great national hero of Ireland is a great saint. I'm not as convinced the best way to celebrate him is by going out and get drunk, but I love the fact that the great hero of the Irish people is this saint. And the two of them actually have quite a bit in common, and I think it's helpful spiritually to look at them through the same lens. So look at Patrick first. A Briton, a Roman Briton is probably the best way to describe his background. As a young man, he's kidnapped. He's basically taken as a slave to Ireland. Now, just those words can just seem so ordinary as you say them or you read them on the printed page. But imagine the reality of that is during that period, so we're like the 4th century, and you're taken away from your home, you're taken to a distant country. It would be like going to the moon for us. I mean, you're carried across the sea to this country you don't know. And there you're a slave. And so Patrick took care of the sheep and so on. And there he was, and he didn't speak the language. He probably learned the rudiments of the language of the Irish people, but he must have felt lost. He must have felt that his life had simply come undone. Well, in time, we know that he managed to escape, and somehow, by hook or by crook, he made his way back home, and then eventually to France, where he was educated and became a priest. Then we see this extraordinary moment. His decision to return to Ireland. Now again, put yourself in that position. You've been taken from your home. You've spent years in awful enslaved exile in a foreign country, compelled to learn a language not your own, oppressed by this foreign people. Wouldn't even the best of people be tempted to say, look, I'll never go back there. The last place I'll ever go is there. Or if I go back, I'll go with an army that's going to try to, wreak vengeance on these people. But instead, what Patrick decided to do, probably with the rudiments of the Irish language in his mind, he decided to go back to Ireland to evangelize. Now, here's what I want you to see. I think this is the great spiritual lesson in the story. Read from a purely human standpoint, my earlier description is what makes sense. If simply from a human subjective standpoint, you read Patrick's situation, you'd say either I'll never go back or I'll go back in vengeance, right? But what did he do? Stubbornly, he read his life from God's perspective. So, ripped away from home, family, friends, enslaved, sent into exile, forced labor, all this awful negativity. Just negativity? Or what if you read it from the standpoint of God? That God permits certain evils to bring about a greater good. And in fact, wasn't it the very fact that Patrick knew the Irish people, that he learned at least the rudiments of their language, he was acquainted with their country, that enabled him then to return very efficaciously as an evangelist? Now, lots of struggles ensued, but Patrick becomes one of the greatest missionaries in the history of the church. The fact that I'm sitting here today as an Irishman, many, many, many centuries later, it's because of him. It's because of this kid who decided, no, I'm not going to return in vengeance. I'm going to return to evangelize. He saw the wicked things that happened to him as an occasion, as part of God's ultimate plan. How do you see your life? How do you read your life? That's the question. Now, link it to St. Joseph. Joseph, we know so little about him, but that laconically told story in the New Testament, it has been so powerful that it's generated inspiration and meaning now over 20 centuries. Here's Joseph, betrothed to this young woman whom he loves, and he discovers that before they live together, she's pregnant. Now, he's described as a good and decent man, a law-abiding man. But what must his attitude have been? Here's this woman, I love her, I'm going to marry her, but she's pregnant outside of marriage. He was utterly justified by Mosaic law to expose her to a public stoning. Instead, we hear he decided to divorce her quietly, to spare her that fate. But then he hears the voice of the angel who explains to him what's going on. And Joseph decides to take Mary in as his wife, and he becomes the foster father and protector of the Son of God. Now again, what are we looking at? Someone whose life had taken a kind of calamitous turn. Imagine getting that news, and you're Joseph, knowing what you knew at the time. That was calamitous news. But he decided to trust in the higher voice of God that was situating this darkness and confusion within a far greater horizon. As the story goes on, we hear that Joseph, again, listening to an angel, takes the Holy Family into Egypt. Now, it sounds, again, rather bland on the printed page. At that time, though, in that place, to take a young woman and a newly born child and cover hundreds of miles of dangerous road, now live in a place that you know nothing about. So, I mean, we don't know anything about what happened to them, but they go somewhere in Egypt, and I don't know, do they know anyone? Do they have any connections? Joseph listens again as the angel says, return to Nazareth, and he obeys. Look at the last thing we hear about the finding of Jesus in the temple. 12-year-old kid, lost. Now, any parent hearing those words, a lost child, I mean, it fills you with probably the greatest anxiety. Lost for how long? Not a few minutes or hours. 3 days. 3 days, gone. Can you imagine Mary and Joseph? They probably didn't sleep. They probably didn't eat. They were in the height of anxiety. When they find him, and Mary says, understandably, didn't you know your father and I were looking for you? And Jesus responds, well, didn't you know I had to be about my Father's business? In every one of these stories of Joseph, you find something calamitous, something dark and difficult and dangerous. But at each turn, he stubbornly saw it in a higher light. Not simply from the standpoint of his own ego, of the ego drama. How will this affect me? How will this affect my plans? But rather, he put all of the struggle and all the suffering in the context of God's ultimate purpose. See, it makes both Patrick and Joseph models of faith. Now, Bill Maher and company notwithstanding, faith does not mean the surrender of the intellect. It does not mean accepting things on the basis of no evidence and all that nonsense. What faith means in a biblical perspective is abandoning the ego drama and accepting the theodrama. Seeing your life from the standpoint not of your own ego and its immediate needs, but from the standpoint of God's ultimate purpose. That's to be a person of faith. My hope is that year after year, as these feasts come around, Patrick and Joseph, that both these great men are seen in that context as models of a faithful vision of life.